Welcome back to the Business Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, David Carr, founder of Steward Your Business, where we bring you great guests week after week. And I'm super excited to get into a brand new conversation I'm pretty sure you've never heard or talked about in this particular way. I think it's very timely because we're talking about something that affects almost every business owner and leader right now. And it's really how do you attract, retain, and generally support those great people in today's economy and what we're facing with all these different changes. And because many employers, one of the biggest sources of stress, employees and employers, is really not the work itself. It's actually housing. It's affordability, it's financial uncertainty, and wondering whether or not they can actually build sustainability, stability, if you will, for their future. And that's where I'm excited to have our guests on here rethinking and challenging that entirely. Today, I'm joined by Larry Salazar, president and co-founder of NestSTEPS. Make sure I get that right, Larry. An innovative platform, really helping companies turn home ownership into an employee benefit. So this is kind of something I hadn't heard before, and I thought you, as our listeners, would benefit from Larry's decades of experience. He's led marketing, product strategy, growth initiatives across fintech, healthcare, software as a service, benefits organizations, and now he's focused on helping employers strengthen their loyalty, their retention, and workforce wellness through accessibility. So I'm excited about that. Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here for sure.
Definitely, Larry. Well, I think one of the things I found, and what you and I connected on LinkedIn, and we're going to include this all in our profile, Larry's profile here and whatnot in our show notes. But one thing I connected with you, Larry, was this idea around leadership, culture, employee retention, and how, it's been very important to me, and it's something that I'm passionate about in Steward Your Business. And so I want to get to the root, the problem, the challenge here is why has housing, from your perspective, become a business issue, not just a personal issue? What are you seeing in the marketplace? What do you because this is what is got you created NestSTEPS, and excited for you to impact this.
Well, let me just start with this. Look, the cost to replace an employee is somewhere around 50% to 200% of that employee's salary. It's a lot of money, and beyond the dollars, the impact is just far-reaching, right? We're talking about teams getting stretched, institutional knowledge sometimes disappearing, quality sometimes suffer, day-to-day operations experience gaps. And one of the leading causes of employee turnover actually is financial stress. Well, it turns out housing is the single largest contributor to that financial stress because it accounts for roughly 34% of household expenditure. And if you're living in places like in the Western region, like California or even New York, it's a lot more expensive even there, right? So the problem is it's not getting any better. Housing costs are going higher and higher and higher. And so I think that's one of the big challenges that we're seeing. I mean, there was a study that was done by PwC a couple of years ago, and they said that financial stress affects 3 out of 10 people in the way that they spent 3 hours every single week dealing with personal financial matters during work hours. Now, that may not seem like a lot. That's roughly about 9% of your time at work every week. That's a lot of time that's gone to lost productivity. And so that costs companies a lot of money. And in order to address those issues around productivity or employees who are leaving the organization because they are looking for higher pay to pay off bills, to get where they want to be, they need to think about beyond what happens in the workplace. They need to think about what's happening at home.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. I think as you say that, as a business leader, I may be underestimating that emotional weight that employees are really carrying. And what you're saying is think about that, and it is showing up. And I'm grateful that you're sharing these statistics. And I think sometimes we don't realize 9% every week of their time, 3 hours, or what the case, that does take a toll. And I know, the mandate to go back to work, quote unquote, driving, and that's additional time, additional costs that they have to drive to and from. Some folks are fortunate that they can work from home, but again, all of these stresses that are building up um, like you said, if they want to, I guess what I'm hearing too here, Larry, is that if employers can keep those folks and find a way of like, well, I've got to go get more money or I've got to move away or something like that, how can they find a way to, you know, keep them and talk a little bit more about you had this vision with NestSTEPS. How did that first come together as you're seeing the weight of this problem?
Well, honestly, I've had a passion for the home since I was a kid. I've always known there was something special about the home. And the
Mm,
reality is, this is where everybody has their fondest memories. This is where it all starts.
mhm,
But it was about 25 years ago, I was working for a great company, working for Boeing, as a matter of fact, down in Southern California. And
mhm,
at the time, my wife and I were renting a home. Um, these brand new condos came on the market. They got listed and they were for about $150,000. And we were living near Cyprus. We were actually in Cyprus near Huntington Beach. And
mhm,
so this is a great opportunity for us to go purchase a home, our first home, but we didn't know what to do. Okay. We didn't know
mhm,
what the process was. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to afford the home or qualify for a loan. And so we left. We left the company about 2 years later for a position that paid slightly more in a much more affordable area. And as a result, I bought my first home in this new area. But I think the reason why I'm bringing that up is, look, I loved that company. I love the culture, the people, the work. But what tugged me away was something I was even more passionate about, which was the home. And
mhm,
I would argue that there are a lot of people, and the data clearly shows this, that a lot of people will find greater loyalty to their home and their own aspirations and needs than they would be to their employer. The key here is to bridge the two pieces, right? And that's why employers need to get involved. So for
mhm,
us, when we started NestSTEPS, that was one of those moments where we realized how powerful home ownership was. But it wasn't for years later, after I started working at Health Equity, when I was, doing benefits, doing product marketing for a benefits company, and
yep,
then later on worked for another company that was in the fintech space, that I finally realized, hey, something is connecting. All these different points are connecting. By then, my wife and I had already launched a real estate brokerage, and suddenly all the dots now became uh, understood, right? And now I understood what the big picture was, which was we can help employees to achieve home ownership and in the process achieve financial well-being. We can help them feel more productive at work. We can help them feel more loyal to their employers. And as a result, we can help employers cut costs and really focus on building their organization and not worrying about backfilling people who have left. That's
mhm.
kind of where it all came together. It wasn't any one moment in time, but it just lots of different data points along the way that really created the snowball effect and realizing NestSTEPS is the answer.
Well, I love that. And hopefully, if you're a business owner or leader leading in, realize it's not necessarily just one aha moment, like Larry said. It's these stepping stones that kept pointing this direction. And I think that's so important, Larry, is that we can pay attention. And that's one of the reasons why we have this podcast is we want to have some different voices. And hopefully you're
Yeah.
learning from these folks that have come before you and say, oh man, I didn't think about that. And in fact, what you just sparked to me, Larry, especially when you're talking about first time home buyers, how as a business owner, you like you said can help educate, share some knowledge as to what they're going to need to, because as you and I know, as you're real estate and a broker, you're going to have to refer back, what's my income, how am I coming in, and how would I be qualified, what does that look like, and your employer is probably your greatest source of income. Yeah, so they're going to be your main person that you're going to have to get information on so that you can show that you qualify and all of those things for a loan and things like that. So thinking a little differently about helping those people, particularly for first time home buyers, but I think otherwise too. I liked your story about like I didn't even understand and I had to like go somewhere else because we didn't know what that looked like. And
Yeah.
so you're like saying, how do we keep our people here from moving away? Especially when you're talking about, I'm thinking about the generation. I'm 52, so you're thinking about these younger generation, the younger millennials or the Gen Zers of like, okay, because some of them are forgoing. You don't even know, like, I don't think I can afford anything. So now, what are my
That's a
job
great point.
options, right?
Yeah.
Where would I go?
Yeah,
Right.
and that's a great point. I mean, let me just back up for a second because you're
Mm-hmm.
you're right. A lot of them think they can't afford anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? And as a result, for them, it seems like the American dream is kind of dimming. But
Mm-hmm.
the truth of the matter is, it's not dimming. The reality is that that there's just strategies that you can leverage in order to get
Mhm.
into homes. Now, through our brokerage side of our business, we're able to help people get into homes. And there's some of these people are in their early 20s. These are young people who are getting in. And in those cases, some of them are just going out there and doing house hacking where they buy a home, they'll rent out some rooms and so forth, and they'll stay there for a couple of years or so. And then eventually they move on to buy a second home and so forth. And so they're building wealth. They're
Mhm.
achieving financial well-being, and they're
Mhm.
getting into homes. And what's important about this whole situation is they're not just renting and throwing away money. Now, some would argue it's not throwing away money because it does give them a place to stay, and that's fair. But I would make this assertion that everyone is buying a home. I
Mm.
don't care if you're renting or you're actually hold a mortgage, you're buying a home. The only
Mhm.
difference is you're buying a home for yourself or you're buying a home for your landlord. And so the idea here is to get people in a situation where they're going to be able to benefit from all the cash that they're actually putting out toward the home, right? Get some
Mhm.
returns out of this so that they can get ahead in life. And the help from the employer is going to create that anchoring between the employer and the employee, and everybody wins out of this situation.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I see at Steward Your Business is that healthy businesses usually are built by leaders who understand people holistically, like you're saying, and looking at their whole situation,
Yes.
and not just operationally. And I think if you're not looking at it that way, I want to challenge you. And if you're listening to this podcast, you most likely are, and you're saying, okay, how do I take care of my employees better? What does that look like? And I will say, Larry, I think that your point of I think laying all these things down on the table, traditionally we have healthcare, we have retirement, and we have these things, but maybe they're not all co-equal, and we need to reevaluate where we're directing these funds. Because I've had conversations, quite honestly, with especially the younger generation, like I would rather forego benefits, for something else, and or more vacation. There's different lifestyles. So talk a little bit about how you've approached this, because I'm sure you've had some resistance, but talk a little bit about, hey, we're introducing a new benefit that's additional burden, or is it mean we treat everything the same? Talk about how you've started to bring this into the marketplace, Larry.
Well, I think our focus primarily was really on hammering the pain points that employers have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their pain point is really around the enormous costs to them in terms of turnovers and lost
Yep.
productivity. That's how we've approached the market, because that is really what we're trying to help solve for, at least
Yep.
for the employer. That said, you bring up the point about retirement planning, health insurance. These
Mm-hmm.
are both really valuable benefits that already are offered, and they are cornerstones for benefits in most companies. And I think the reason why they are so valuable, and I point this out to employers as well, is because they don't just address workplace experience. They
Mm-hmm.
address the whole person. And
Yep.
this is a very critical key difference here. You see in the past, and look, your audience has seen this probably a lot in recent years, right? You go to interview for a job and they show you around. They've got ping pong tables over here, right? They've got soda machines and their kitchen stocked, and they say, "Oh, we also provide for free breakfast every Thursday or whatever it is, or Taco Tuesday, whatever it is, right?" All of that stuff is great. Don't get me wrong. All of that stuff is very appealing, but it's the retirement planning, it's the healthcare that really addresses the whole person. And we
Mm-hmm.
need to think about that, right? That's how we approach the employers. We need to think
Mm-hmm.
about the whole person, not just the workplace experience. And there's a reason for this. You probably know this. You go to work, you have struggles at work, you're going to
Oh,
take
yeah.
it home with you,
Yep.
right? Who
Yeah.
doesn't talk to their spouse or partner about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have problems at home, you take it to work. You may not talk about it, but it shows up in your productivity. It shows up in your decisions. You're distracted and so forth. And so
Mm-hmm.
when we approach the market, we're trying to explain to them, hey, we need to find a better way to take care of the employees, meaning take care of the person,
Right.
right? Not just the employee who's there those 8 hours, 9 hours, or whatever it is. We need to find a better way. And that means addressing things that could affect them at home. And that is the reason why health insurance, that's the reason why retirement planning continues to be a value to employees, because they all know that it has a greater impact on them beyond what happens in the office.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I absolutely, that makes total sense. Again, here we've got those cornerstones of health insurance and retirement, and then you've got these other elements, like you said. Okay, fringe, I don't say fringe benefits, but what does that look like? And so, what I'm hearing you say, Larry, is think a little differently. Pizza on Friday or whatnot, or even I'm thinking, for those companies that have some kind of profit sharing or employee ownership. You have a certain, as an employer, you have a certain pool of money you've set aside. But to your point too, Larry, I think that it's important that there's a set side we pay for benefits, but look at the cost. If we, I think this often gets overlooked. Look at the cost, like you said, of if I lose this employee, how much money will I have to spend in order to get that person
Yeah.
back up and running? And to your point, I've got a return on investment calculator if anyone wants it, of like what does that cost for you based on your company. I'm happy to share that with you. But to your point, Larry, I think that they don't generally think about that, and then they have the turnover, like you're saying. The employees they're stressed. They're bringing it back home, and they're like, I'm just going to go somewhere else. I'm going to try and make this work, and then they lose that employee. And how, in your experience, I'm curious, because I think, again, the employers that are addressing this issue, bring it to the forefront. I'm sure they're hearing from their employees. They're like, hey, how many of you are struggling with home ownership or where you're living, and trying to help them get a gauge so that they can be more proactive. Again, that the employee feels more taken care of. They feel like, hey, they're looking after me, not just
Yeah.
being purely transactional, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yep.
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 So you understand the pyramid diagram that explains human motivation. It goes from needs, right, all the way to aspirations, self-actualization, all the types of
Yes.
things, right? Some people might think home ownership is a need. It's a shelter. In reality, it's aspirational. It goes
Hmm.
all the way up to the top of that pyramid, right?
Yep.
And so, being able to offer something like that does create this connection, this anchoring between an employee and an employer. And there's proof of this, right? We actually
Hmm.
just did this nationwide study. We completed it literally last week. We haven't compiled all the information yet, but I could tell you some of the key things that we found on that, all right? One of which
Hmm.
is 78% of employees would switch employers for home ownership benefits offered by another employer. 78%. That's a
Wow.
huge chunk of people who would do that. 89% said they would stay even after receiving home purchasing assistance. In other words, they're not just saying, hey, give me the money, I buy a home. Okay, I'm not loyal to you anymore. Right? They're
Hmm.
saying that they actually will stay even after that. It tells you that emotional connection that's happening when an employer invests in the employee in such a manner. So that's an important piece.
Yeah. So if they're thinking about this, Larry, and they're like, okay, walk me through a little bit about what does that look like after they hear this concept of like, okay, well, what does Nest Steps actually do for me? Like, how does that help
Yeah.
me? Yeah.
Yeah, so like if you're an employee, here's what would happen, right? So if you're an employee, you would enroll in a program like this, right? You sign up for it, and then we would put you on a platform, and a financial management platform. That's the first thing we do. And this is
Hmm.
really critical because we want to help you to not only get into a home, but we want you to be financially healthy and stay in that home. And that's so the platform will help them better manage their finances, and it will eliminate as much as possible unconscious spending, which is the reason why a lot of people can't save. Okay, so
Mm.
that's the first piece. During the process of getting all set up with that platform, you, the employee, go through a series of educational workshops that we hold live within an organization. We typically do 6 of them, and they prepare the employee for home ownership. And if that employee already owns a home, we help them understand what can be done to ensure the value of your home continues to increase, and how can you leverage that home to ensure long-term financial stability. So those educational workshops are paired up with one-on-one guidance from licensed professionals that we provide, right? These professionals are going to help you to set your budget, to help you stay on course. If you have a goal to make a down payment on your second home even, right? They'll help you stay on course, and just give you all the guidance that you need to go through that entire journey.
Mm.
And then the third component will be when you're ready to purchase a home, right? You're going to be able to request a contribution directly from the employer. And the employer will then provide that amount after seeing that you're eligible and you've completed all your different parts of the program. They'll send money directly to the title company and in order to help you pay for that benefit. Or I'm sorry, for that home. So for us, NestSTEPS, what we actually also do is we contribute $1,000 directly to the purchase of a home. So everyone who goes through that program, if they purchase a home through our program, then what will happen is we'll contribute the same way as well. And we'll do that
Wow.
for a couple of years. And then after that, what will happen is if the employer decides to keep that program, we expect them to contribute in some way,
Hmm.
shape, or form because the value is for them, right?
Right.
We want them to build that anchoring. And so we'll still match up to $1,000 for them. Now, if they give $5,000, we'll still match up to 1,000. If they give 3,000, we'll match up to 1,000 and so forth. But the point of it is we want them to contribute in some way, shape, or form because this is how you build that relationship with the employee. So that's how it basically works for the employer side. They're actually looking at the same platform. They can't see certain data, right, of the employee. You don't want that, right? There's compliance issues there, but they
Yeah.
can see how the program is actually impacting
Hmm.
the turnover rates. And they'll
Yes.
see how they're performing against their peer organizations that are out there, right? And so there's a little bit of a competition going on amongst employer groups, but there's also real data to show them how it's actually moving the needle because most benefits will give you data on utilization. They'll give you data maybe from some surveys, but they don't really show you how it directly connects to retention or even talent acquisition. That's the whole point. We're trying to
Mhm.
create a benefit that actually moves the needle because we believe it can do such a thing. And the case studies in the past show it absolutely does.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to ask Larry. So once they, so employers, I can see the benefit of like you're giving them education, you're informing them, you're creating a platform in a way that they can get checks and make sure, hey, am I on target? Somebody's essentially, you know, and they don't like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you have, so you're outside, so you're not, there's no, it's not like a realtor or somebody else where they're like, hey, I want you know, I'm gonna get money on this selling or buying the home, but you're get a third party that's basically trying to help educate you and understanding so that they can see, okay, we're making progress. As an employer, that's helpful for me too to think about, hey, the money I'm going to invest, whatever the 1,000, 5,000, whatever that I is like, I feel like it's well invested because they're putting in time and effort, and I'm putting time effort too. It's not just one or the other. That's what I hear you saying.
It is. It is. There is. Look, there is a component of realtors, right?
Yeah.
But our program is that we train, and it's purely educational. This isn't a realtor coming in and say, "Hey, I've got 20 boxes of pizza. Come
Right.
listen to me tell you about my services or anything like that."
Right.
This is
Right. Right.
actual education. The hope is that the employee will not go to their cousin or their next door neighbor, but they'll actually use our folks
Mm-hmm.
ultimately to go purchase a home. And so
Mm-hmm.
that way, there's a separate engagement outside and beyond, what's happening in the office, right? And
Right.
so that's why we don't actually, that's why it doesn't actually cost the employer a whole lot of money other than their investment in the employee.
Right.
So, so
And
it's
that allows you
again,
to
it's a win-win.
do that $1,000 match as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. There's a
Right.
lot of companies who may not have planned for something like this in the beginning, right? But they hear about it, they want to do something about it, but they don't have the budget. That's okay. We'll give you a two-year runway if you need it. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's companies who say, I'll contribute right away. That's fine. We'll still give $1,000. So for that first 2 years, we'll give $1,000 in place of or in addition to whatever the employer actually contributes.
Is there so when employers are looking at benefits, sometimes it's regulated on like you have this many employees, therefore you need to do this. Where have you found this to be most effective in organizations, Larry, that you've been working with, where it's like, okay, maybe not 5 employees, but maybe when you get to 10 or 20, it really becomes a differentiator in the marketplace. What have you been seeing?
I think over 100 is really where it
The sweet
starts to
spot?
get. Yeah, it starts to get really good for the employer. They have the budget to move things forward.
Mhm.
They have enough people to work with, but there's a lot of employers that are smaller. And so what we've done in order to fill that gap is we started working with PEOs. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with professional employer
Go ahead.
organizations.
Unpack it for our audience, Larry.
Oh, yeah. So these are basically businesses that allow for small businesses to use their EIN. And as a result, with the aggregation of all these small businesses, they're able to provide better rates on different benefits, insurance, and so forth, right?
Mhm.
And so they're basically lending out their EIN.
Yep.
And so when we're working with a PEO, they can literally group a number of small businesses together in order to achieve the same results as a larger employer
Hmm.
would be able to achieve. And so for us, that's when we can provide the education, we can provide the contributions, similarly. But it's just there may be multiple different businesses that are, coming together in a single group.
That's a great another option. So again, if you're listening to this and you're a business owner, you're not 100+ employees, but you're like, hey, how could I take advantage of that? That's a great option, Larry.
Yeah,
And I've heard of that similarly with medical benefits and other things as well. So like getting in on that, I think is really important.
yeah,
I talk a and I really appreciate you bringing a different perspective here, because the Business Roundtable, we're really all about growth, people development, making sure that these are all connected. And I'll just say, if those of you guys are listening in and enjoying this conversation, please, of course, subscribe and follow along and leave comments for Larry. We will make sure that he gets them, or share with another business owner or HR leader who is maybe wondering, hey, what can I do differently to help improve the retention, the place for our employees come in week after week, month after month. But talk a little bit about your journey, Larry, because I think you didn't come to this overnight. Like you said, there's these stepping stones,
yeah.
and I think can you talk a little bit about your journey and just leadership and innovation and making these changes? You've been in so many different industries, of like your success in this, and challenges too, quite honestly. But to encourage those that may say, it's another risk, I'm uncertain, and to how you were able to face that and overcome those risks or challenges that inevitably come up, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, it's interesting to me because I always think about this quote from who was that founder? Now I forgot. I just lost the name. But the founder of Apple,
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. That's right. Steve Jobs made a comment at one point, and it was a quote that was very well, just resonated with me. He said that you can never really connect the dots when you're looking forward. You can only connect the dots when you're looking backwards, right? Meaning
Mm-hmm.
you're able to finally see, hey, how all these different pieces fit together after. Well, that's kind of what it was, right? I never thought initially, my journey was never to go create NestSTEPS. That
Mm-hmm.
was not the point. In fact, yes, I had a passion for the home, but if anything, I wanted to be an architect of all things, right? I wanted, because I didn't know what other options there were with the home. And so,
Yeah.
but things didn't work out that way. I became a marketer, I became a product manager, and so forth, right? And a growth executive, and so forth. But I think once we decided to make a business of it, it was it was at a point where in my life where I had to make a huge decision. So I was laid off from this one position, and initially I did what everybody else did, which was go apply for a job, right?
Yeah. Good job. Mm-hmm.
But then I realized, hey, I've always wanted to start a business at one point or another.
Yep.
This is the time to do it, and I have an idea. And so we started doing what we did, right? We have a business on the side already, and we want to start another business. So here we are. We're starting this business, and that journey was not easy, I'll tell you that. Starting a starting NestSTEPS required so many different components, like the product itself. What's going to work? And I'll
Yeah.
tell you, that was probably the hardest part because initially we had a third-party platform we were going to leverage, but the third-party platform could not scale to what we actually needed to do,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't purposeful enough. And so, and I still remember this one day. I was taking a shower. This is where all great ideas
Yeah.
come from,
Right. Yep.
right?
Taking a
I'm
shower.
taking a shower, and I'm like thinking, we need to build our own platform because only by doing so can we actually provide the key features, the capabilities that are necessary for driving behavior change. And in this sense, we're talking about healthy financial behaviors, eliminating unconscious spending, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what really was perhaps the biggest challenge. Then all of a sudden, I'm having to build a product, and I'm bootstrapping,
Yeah.
and things always come together, because I think it was like days after that somebody came to us and said, "I heard about what you guys are building. I want to invest." And so capital came flowing in. And the point of it is, when you have your eyes set on something and you're doing everything you can, sometimes there's going to be gaps that you can't fill, and you just gotta pray for the best to happen. And sometimes the prayers get answered, and people
Amen.
come into your lives and help you to bridge those gaps.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and this is one of them. I mean, we have one. Hopefully, if you're praying or looking for, resources, why we put out the Business Roundtable podcast is there's another person. Here's Larry Salazar that can talk with you, walk you through. If you thought, well, how can I help take care of my people in a different way? Here is a way. It's not the only way, but it is a way. And we love to have different voices on the podcast, because one thing that I really appreciate is that, innovation often starts by paying attention to where people are struggling, they're hurting, and maybe feeling stuck. And so I see, Larry, you're like, okay, you could have gone and got a job. In fact, I started Steward Your Business when I pivoted from the previous company. I said I could go get a job, or I could try to help more people. And this podcast wasn't even in my radar at the time, but that came about because I met with other business owners like yourself, and they said, how do we help those folks out there that are struggling, whether they're the business owner or the leader, to improve their lives and the lives that they get to influence around them. And so I'm so appreciative of you doing that, Larry, and creating a space and then contributing, what I hear you in contributing to other organizations that adapt well, take care of their folks so they don't struggle and they don't blink out. Unfortunately, we know a lot of companies blink out, and big companies too. We're not talking just small ones. We're talking some big ones that they just didn't pivot in the marketplace and really meet their employers. And the employers meeting their employees' needs, really taking care of them, and having folks that stick around with them for the long term. What you said, I think earlier, is like, you said, hey, we're looking at like a lunch here or a thing there, and those are not bad things in the short term, but looking longer. And I'll just say this, because I was watching a video earlier today, and you just sparked this in me, Larry. You said, if you're building something that's going to outlast you're like me, my lifetime, I think that's something very powerful. And building a home and a space that's not just for you, but it's going to be generational, is very, very powerful. And to me, that's a totally different mindset and a way of approaching the world.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's funny that as you're talking about this, what comes to my mind is this. Sometimes people look at, especially employers, right? They're looking at the how, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's not the starting point. I'll be honest. I think the starting
Mm-hmm.
point is what? What are you trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, if I said to myself, okay, how am I going to go about my next 10 years? I'm thinking right off the bat when I got laid off, I'm thinking I got to get another job, right, and so forth. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what really changed for me was, like I said, I always wanted to do something. I wanted to start a business. I wanted to follow my passion and so forth, and that led me to explore all these different options that were available to me, right? And so if I'm an employer, if your goal is really to just help your employees get more productive, feel more valued at work, don't limit yourself to the traditional things that are sitting in front of you. Don't limit yourself. Allow for yourself to think broadly. That's an important piece, because
Mm-hmm.
only then you're going to be able to discover the other innovations that are out there. I'm not claiming to have the only innovation. There's plenty of people who are trying to innovate that space. But it's hard to get into that mindset where you have to say, okay, here's the options that are available to me. And here's options I've never heard of, so I'm not going to focus on that. Well, you've got to change your thinking. If you broaden up your view to what am I trying to solve for, period. And then allow for yourself to take in, new ideas and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, that's again why we have the podcast here, Larry. I know we're getting to the end of the podcast. I would love to go deeper, but getting your leadership, and sharing that in your journey, how you came to create NestSTEPS. And for those that want to learn more, we're going to make sure that's all in our show notes here. You guys can definitely check it out and connect with Larry, because at the end of the day, we all want to be healthier. Our businesses want to be healthier. We want to have stronger leadership, people aligned, more intentional in how we're, showing up and supporting one another. And so, that's why I founded Steward Your Business. So that's why you
That's
got
right.
what are we trying to do and why are we trying to do it? Yeah, and we're just coming at it at different angles, and I love that, Larry. What would you say, as we're kind of wrapping up here, to that business owner, HR leader, or somebody else in the organization that's saying, hey, you know what, we've got to do something different. We've got, think about it differently. What would you encourage them to do that they can take action on today, Larry, to improve the lives of their employees in particular?
Yeah, I think there's several things. One is take a look at the studies that are out there. And we're going to release our study to the public in a short time here. But take a look at the studies on understanding what the workforce really wants. Don't just immediately go to your 401k. Don't just immediately go to your health insurance and stuff like that, right? Just take a step back. Think about what's happening. Think about what the employer employee relation looks like, relationship looks like. Take a look at what the employees want. That's the first thing. Second, you gotta stop thinking about this as an HR issue, and you have to reframe that to the executive team, because that's the reason why executives don't look at this and take it as serious as they should. Like I said, the cost on this is not what's showing up in the balance sheet, right? We're not just talking about, the cost to, put an ad out there to replace somebody. You're pulling your hair out if you're on a team and you've lost 2 people, right? And so we need to reframe this as a financial and operational risk. When productivity is at risk, when retention is at risk, that's how it affects the company operationally and financially. That's an important piece. And then use that data from the studies to back that assertion that we need to take a much more higher level approach to the challenges that we're experiencing. I think that's the first step, and that will open up the how, the avenues to how do we achieve our goals, right? But we've got to tackle the what first. And in this case, it happens to be, the cost is a lot greater than you think it is. And things aren't necessarily moving the needle the way you think they are thus far.
Yeah. Think differently here. Larry, I really appreciate this conversation, because you're building goes far beyond just benefits and even housing. Honestly, it's really about being that, you just talked about being that responsible leader, looking at your workforce well-being, hiring and creating stability for your team, making sure that everybody's taken care of. And I'm so appreciative of that, Larry. We're going to make sure you have links to Larry, NestSTEPS, additional resources in our show notes. If we can get that study, we'll drop that in there too, so that you guys can connect with Larry and learn more there. And if this conversation sparked ideas around leadership, culture, communication, building healthy organizations, I encourage you to reach out to me at Steward Your Business as well. Larry, thank you so much for being with us on the podcast today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Until next time, be well. Thanks for listening.